I would like to start my talk with a saying that goes like this. Until the lions have their own historians, the history of the hunt will always glorify the hunter. So there are different ways of saying the same thing. Until the lion tells his side of the story, the tale of the hunt will always glorify the hunter. I'm very honored to be invited to this panel devoted to the great work of James Curry, who has spent his life helping transforming what I call silences into mentions. By that I mean helping to hear voices perhaps that will have been never heard. James Curry is a former academic publisher specializing in African studies that provide voices to many African intellectuals in a wide range of disciplines, including politics, history, archaeology, economics, development studies, gender studies, literature, and so on and so forth. So James Curry's excellent work at first Henneman's African Writer Series helped the entire, I should say, world to know many African writers, such as those on the screens. I cannot even pronounce their names. So one thing I think if we really, we can, thinking about the merit of James Curry's work, is a counterfactual thought on the merit of James Curry's work, because I think James Curry is interested also in this way of thinking, a counterfactual way of thinking. So we can ask, correct, what would have happened to many African writers who now enjoy international recognition if James Curry had not decided to support and work with them through Henneman African Writer Series. So I think this is a pretty interesting way of thinking about James Curry's work. So we can actually proudly say that James Curry has been one of the Lions historians. So ladies and gentlemen, let's give a big round of applause to James Curry. So, I mean, really being able to provide a version of our own side of the story or history, finding people who are supportive of our work is not only amazing, but it's also justice. Because for a long time, our history has been silenced. So we definitely need people who can help transforming silences into mention. So when I actually talk about silence, I'm alluding to the work of a Haitian scholar whose name is Michel Wolfe-Trouillot. He wrote a pretty interesting text, Silencing the Past, Power in the Production of History. And by silence, he means an active and transitive process. So one silences a fact or an individual, as a silencer silences a gun. One engages in the practice of silencing. So this is how actually he understands what we actually mean by silence. So this is true for Caribbean and African writers. This is true for black scholars in many disciplines. And to illustrate this particular aspect, I would like to refer to a very interesting article by Richard Delgado. I used to teach race and public policy before I became a politician. Now, forget those things. But this article, The Imperial Scholar, Reflection on a Review of Civil Rights Literature. And this work, Delgado talks about something that puzzled him as a scholar when he decided to turn his attention to civil rights law and scholarship. So he and his student decided to review about 20 leading review articles on civil rights, he noticed that each of the writers was white and male. And then he decided to go further by reviewing the footnotes of these articles to realize that the works cited were also written by scholars who were themselves white and male. He created a kind of pictorial representation of who cites whom in civil rights literature. He realized that Paul Boyce cites Lawrence Schwab. Lawrence Schwab cites Paul Boyce and Frank Michelman, who cite Owen Fisk and Lawrence Schwab and Kenneth Cost, all white male. So he says, it doesn't matter where one enters the universe, one comes to the same result. An inner circle of about a dozen white male writers who comment on, take positive issue with, extol, criticize, and expand on each other's ideas. It is something like, he says, an elaborate minuet. And that puzzled him because he knew that there were about 100 black, 25 Hispanic, and 10 Native American law professors teaching at American law schools. And many of them are writing in areas about which they are deeply care, such as anti-discrimination law, the equality principle, affirmative action, and so on and so forth. And much of those scholarship, he realizes, seems to go to being consigned to oblivion. In other words, these works have been silenced. So in civil rights scholarship, Delgado thinks that it's just a scholarly tradition that consists of white scholars, systematic occupation of, and exclusion of minority scholars from the central area of civil rights scholarship. So the mainstream writers, he realizes, tend to acknowledge only each other's work. He therefore thinks that it's even possible that consciously or not, they resist entry by minority scholars into the field. So, where I do not agree perhaps with Richard Delgado, when he believes that this scholarly tradition exists mainly in civil rights scholarship. And then, according to him, non-white scholars in other fields of law seems to confront no such tradition. So what I do think, I think that the silencing of minority scholarship in civil law literature is part of a more general practice that the Haitian scholar that I just mentioned calls silencing the past. And I think silencing the past is a global and a conscious strategy. For instance, why on earth the Haitian Revolution has been treated as a non-event, the only slave successful revolution throughout the world. So another example perhaps is how the voice of the majority of Haitians living in Haiti has been silenced by oligarchs, by politicians too. Why? And anyone, any leader, real leader, who takes initiatives to advocate on behalf of the majority are facing or can face obstacles going from character assassination to physical assassination. And here I'm giving you the example of Jean-Jacques Dessalines, who was the pioneer of the Haitian Revolution. He was killed because he was advocating on behalf of those who are left behind. And another example is President Moïse, whom I serve as Minister of Foreign Affairs and then as Prime Minister. He was killed when I was his Prime Minister. He was someone who actually want to give voice to the voiceless. He is someone who wanted to transform silences into mention. So the story of President Moïse's assassination is a story of state capture, is a story of an elite few taking hostage a majority of poor people living with less than $2 a day. Is a story of Haitian oligarchs getting millions for services never provided to the Haitian. When we seek justice, when we want justice to be served for President Moïse, so it's justice for the majority of Haitians who is voiceless. They indeed kill President Moïse, but they will never assassinate his ideas and the cause he was fighting for. The cause of transforming silences into mention. And we believe that the fight shall not stop. Thank you.